2024 is the most important election year of our lives. But in Kalamazoo County, democracy isn't once in a lifetime. It's an everyday effort by ordinary people like you to improve the well-being of our communities, our loved ones, and ourselves.
Hi, I'm Kerria Randolph, and this is Inside Kalamazoo, and today our guests are Meredith Place and Dusty Farmer.
I'm Dusty Farmer. I am the Oshtemo Township Clerk and Elections Administrator.
Hello, my name's Meredith Place. I'm the Kalamazoo County Clerk and Register of Deeds.
I guess my first question that I have, who can vote in elections in Michigan? And both of you guys, I guess, can answer that?
Yeah.
You know?
We both can.
Yes.
So you have to be 18 years of age, and you have to be registered to vote, and you have to live in the precinct that you're voting in with a few caveats.
And what are those caveats?
So if you have recently moved, you can vote one more time in your precinct. And so that is a conversation that's had in the precinct. If someone shows up and they have a different address, then you have to ask them questions. When did you move is the most important question there. And if it was within the last 30 days, you can vote one more time in the precinct. Then the next time you have to vote in your new precinct.
Do you find that being a problem a lot of times, a lot of issues where people are confused where they vote or how they vote?
It can be. I wouldn't say a lot of the time. I would say that with the 3 different ways of voting right now, that voting is spread out over a longer period of time where we can do some of the troubleshooting early. We send out absentee ballots 40 days before the election begins. We send out applications before that. And so there's a lot of troubleshooting when we get mail returned to us, and we can say, okay, where do you live now? When did you move? Did you register to vote in your new location? So troubleshooting has to happen, but I wouldn't say it's a lot. I mean, that's a matter of perspective. It would be odd if we weren't doing those things, though, because people, they move around. They move around within their jurisdictions, and they move out of their jurisdictions. And it's our job to make sure they're still able to vote when they do that.
Something you just said that piqued my interest, and I think it might pique a lot of people's interest. You said there's 3 different ways to vote. I think most people are used to the traditional way, going and voting. What are the 3 different ways to vote?
So I'll talk about 2 of them, and then I can. So the 2 ways to vote from the township perspective in Kalamazoo County is absentee voting and voting in person on Election Day.
At your precinct.
At your precinct, which would be the more traditional way that I think you referenced. Beyond that, with Prop 2, we now have to have 9 days of early voting, and here in Kalamazoo County, we would all be responsible for doing it on our own, but we had the option to go into an agreement with the county, and that's what most of us did.
Yeah, the 18 of the 19 local jurisdictions decided to coordinate early voting efforts, which is, as Dusty said, a requirement now after Proposal 2. Proposal 2 passed in November 2022. So the first time early voting was available to voters was the February presidential election. And Proposal 2 requires 9 days minimum early in-person voting for state and federal elections. So in Kalamazoo County, 18 of the 19 local jurisdictions are partnering together to offer early voting to those voters in those 18 jurisdictions. Early voting includes, in Kalamazoo County, 4 different locations where voters can vote the second Saturday before the election through the Sunday before the election from 9 to 5. There are 4 locations: WMU, Fetzer Center, the Douglas Community Association on the north side of Kalamazoo, the Parks and Portage Parks and Recreation Department, which is located behind the large Portage Senior Center, and then the Kalamazoo County Expo Center are the 4 locations for early voting.
I think a lot of people are nervous about voting, unsure how to vote. So I want to keep it as simple as possible. How do I know where I vote? How do I find out where I vote?
So I always give the same advice on this one. There are 2 ways that are very easily accomplished. So the first way is to go to michigan.gov/vote, and you can check on your voter information. You can check on your ballot, where you vote, who your clerk is, where drop boxes are located. All of that is linked to that for every jurisdiction in Michigan. So that is one way you can do it on your own. And the other way that I tell people all the time is that if you ever have a question about elections, call your local clerk. Elections are local in Michigan. That is the person who will be able to help you the most quickly. We have fantastic staff here in Kalamazoo County in all these 19 jurisdictions who can be very helpful, and it can be as easy as a phone call. But if folks want to, they can do it online on their own too.
Now you guys,
And the county has on our website, calcounty.com /clerk, you can type in your address and find your polling location to vote on election day. And then you can also type in your address to find an early vote location. And again, most voters in Kalamazoo County can vote at one of those 4 early voting locations. It doesn't matter which one. We have the ability to issue a ballot to voters, again, from 18 of the 19 local jurisdictions. The only jurisdictions that is not participating is Pavilion Township. So Pavilion Township voters would early vote at their local jurisdiction, at their township hall. And all other Kalamazoo County residents have the option to vote early at 4 locations.
I think too, like I said earlier, I think a lot of times people are just intimidated, unsure how to vote. I show up, I get this form. Is it okay for me to ask, what do I do? What is the procedure? Is there a way for me to get that knowledge?
I mean, you can
Absolutely.
ask. We can't tell you very much information as those who are administering the election, but there are resources available that we can connect you to. And the one we were mentioning before we started here is Vote 411. That is a very good resource that is organized by the League of Women Voters, who have done a very good job. They have a very good reputation. They're nonpartisan. They just want to get information to voters. And so they send out questionnaires to all of the eligible candidates who will be on the ballot. And this is especially helpful for local voting, right? Because that seems to be the one that is least covered by the media. And they can go to that and they can read exactly what those candidates submitted as the information about, the platforms they're running on, what's important to them, their connections to the community. It can all be found there. And that's something that we're not involved in creating, and it is completely nonpartisan. They do not give suggestions on who to vote for. They just give you information about what's on your ballot.
So to the question, as the process-wise, if an individual, arrives at their local clerk's office to ask about the process, if they arrive at the county clerk's office to ask about the process of how to vote, yes, there's always staff there to answer their questions, direct them to where their options are. It's just a matter of, we can't answer the question who to vote for, right? But if you arrive at
two different ways of how to vote.
Yeah,
we're talking about. Yes, absolutely.
And as far as a voter who shows up at an early vote location or their precinct on election day, the election inspectors there are trained to walk a voter through that precinct or walk a voter through that early vote location. And so if a voter shows up on election day at the wrong precinct, what they'll initially do is first verify that they are or are not in the correct location to vote if they're not on the voter in the electronic poll book, then they would alert the local clerk, and the local clerk may provide guidance as to where that voter's precinct is on election day. If a voter arrives at an early vote location, it's the same setup, which is really nice. Early voting looks just like how you vote at a precinct. You walk in, you are asked to show identification, you are requested to fill out a voter application form, and then from that point, inspector will guide you to an electronic poll book where your name will be looked in to verify in the poll book to see that you are a registered voter in that location. And from there, they will issue a ballot.
Another big issue that's currently being discussed is the security of voting. Can you discuss that, and how secure are our votes?
Absolutely. I'll just start by saying everything is backed by paper, right? Your ballot, you vote a paper ballot. Individuals who utilize a voter assist terminal also use a form of a paper ballot. And so, oftentimes we get asked about the security of our election and the security of our vote, and remind everyone that no matter what, we can do a hand count because we have everything backed up by paper. But before anybody gets a ballot, before anyone puts a ballot through a tabulator, those machines and the program in the tabulator are tested by trained election officials. So there's a preliminary test which tests the program as well as the hardware. That is done immediately when the local clerks receive the ballot and the program. And now with early voting, the county is also testing all machines in program that is used during those 9 days of early voting. In addition to that preliminary test, there is a public logic and accuracy test that is done in public. I would encourage any member of the public to view public logic and accuracy test, and the same, what's being tested is the same as what was tested in the preliminary test.
Could you discuss that a little bit more? What's the public logic test? What does that consist of?
Well, it's this Thursday if anyone's interested, and it will be happening in all jurisdictions across the county, where we bring out one tabulator, usually in our lobbies, and we run through what we already did before we started issuing ballots, that initial test. So for this election in Oshtemo, we have 32 different ballot styles. We put those through the so it starts at 9 a.m. I guess let's start there. It starts at 9 a.m. and we put those ballots through the tabulator. And we have a list of predetermined results of what we should see from those ballots that went through. And it's every different combination that you could vote in that election. Partisanship, different positions of candidates, whatever it is. And then we can prove that we put these ballots through, we had the predetermined results, and then we zero that tabulator out and lock it back up, because that tabulator is going to also be used on election day. And anyone can view that process, and it's really important. Meredith mentioned our biggest security is that we have the paper ballots. That is very important, because at any given time we can prove that those election results on election night are the same as the number of ballots that we have, and we prove it time and again with recounts. That part is important, but every portion of this election process is public, except for one thing, and that's how someone votes. But so with this entire public process, people can come and view any number of the things that we talk about here today. You can view a precinct opening in the morning and closing at night after voting's done. That is everything is public, and that's what we want to stress with folks. Nothing is secretive here. Even if you want to be able to observe voting on election day, we have public areas so that it doesn't interfere with voting. People can go and observe. There's a process for observing absentee counting boards. And I bring that up because I think that the process all being public also assists with the security of the election, because when those ballots are first given to those precinct chairs who take them to the precinct, to when they are locked up in a ballot container and stored for 6 months or 6 years after the federal election, there is a chain of custody that anyone has the ability to view through the county canvassers. So when the county canvassers are certifying the election that starts the Thursday after the election, that process is also public, and they go through all the paperwork. They make sure that when this container was sealed, that there were 2 people doing it, their names are there, the seal numbers are there, and they match through the entire process. That is a big portion of canvassing that election. That, to me, is our greatest accountability for election security.
And I think, too, something else that you said that I appreciate, in the current climate, there's a lot of division saying a lot of things are done in secret. But I think you said also, I could go view an election from start to finish. So you have no problems with people coming to view elections to make sure there is integrity.
No.
Oh, absolutely. We don't have a problem with it. We have an expectation, though, that if you're there to view and observe. You cannot interrupt the voting process in any way. You cannot speak to the election workers. You cannot speak to the voters. All of that would be inappropriate. You can absolutely observe as much of it as you want, though.
I like the way you said that. There's an expectation. There's no problem coming, but there's also expectations of how you conduct yourself, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely.
What are some of the common reasons for a ballot being rejected?
If the voter moved and they registered to vote somewhere else, we would be notified and that ballot would be rejected. They would have to get a ballot in their new precinct, depending on when they voted. If someone passed away during this process, we would be notified of that and we have to pull that ballot. We do these audits multiple times a week because ballots are constantly coming in. So when they come in, they get checked into the system, meaning that we received it. Voters can check at michigan.gov/vote and see that their ballot was in fact received. And then we have to make a determination. So if at that time, when it gets checked in, we might get notified that that voter has passed away or whatever. And so we would reject it in the system. It's the same process as somebody forgot to sign their ballot envelope. That's a really big thing. If they signed it or they did not sign it, we have to get a hold of them, and we have obligations where we have to text them, call them, email them. Saturday before the election, not this election this year, but elections where I'm not on the ballot, I will show up at your house and knock on your door that Saturday before. We have office hours that Saturday. So your local clerk might handle that differently, but there is a prescribed way that we have to manage it. But we reject that ballot until we get the signature on it. So then if the voter checks online if their ballot was received, it'll show that their ballot was rejected. They'll know to get a hold of us if they haven't responded to those other ways we tried to communicate with them. So those are just some of the reasons it would be rejected. So some of those are a temporary rejection, where if we don't hear back from them, it's going to stay rejected and it will not be counted on election day. And then there are the other ones that are the permanent rejected ones because that voter is no longer eligible to vote in that precinct. There's nothing bad that comes from this. We have so many checks and balances along the way. Because I know that just the opening up of the process is a concern for some folks. But in reality, with the paper ballot backups and the checks that we have through the voter file, the registrations, the ballots, all these things in place, we are ensuring that, one, voters are voting and it's counting, and two, folks who aren't supposed to be voting are not.
I have a question, too, because the more I talk to you both, I realize fraudulent elections are very rare. Somebody trying to steal election, for lack of a better word, doesn't happen often. And something you said earlier.
When has it?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah,
it's not that it hasn't happened often, it's that it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
These claims have gone through the court system. They have been found to be untrue. There's nothing that's been substantiated that someone has tried to steal an election. Even at a very local level where you have even fewer votes to deal with, there's just been no evidence of that.
Something else you said if someone passes away, you're notified that this person is no longer living and eligible to vote? Is that correct?
Absolutely. So
I can.
Yeah, please, because
so
the county has taken over much of this for us. Actually, it's been a great help.
So the county clerk's office is also, we're also the local registrar, so we have all vital records for any individual that was born in the county or also died in the county. So we have all those records, and when it comes to elections, it's obviously important to ensure that the voter rolls are accurate. And the county was always, when a voter passes, it was our responsibility to notify the local clerk so they could remove them from the qualified voter file, the voter rolls, right? Now, and this was also a change through legislation, now our office can simply remove them from the qualified voter file. So it actually has reduced the time in which those lists are maintained. We're not sending any information to the local clerk and relying on another person to remove them. We're doing it as soon as we get the information.
I'm sure you both watch the news and hear stories that just really irritate you because it's so much misinformation.
Yes,
are there several
it is true.
things that you would like to dispel to reassure the public that voting is
there is one thing, because there's been this push, and it hasn't just been here, it's been across the state, where you have local citizens who are not trained elections administrators. They do not work for the state, county, or township, who have access to the voter file, and they can see names of people who they believe should not be registered to vote. And the piece that I want to dispel here is that we would at any point be just willy-nilly unregistering people to vote. And that has nothing to do with your attitude or opinion about who should be registered to vote. This is law. And us as individual clerks don't have a lot of leeway to just make decisions, which is another important piece to election security. We follow and enforce the law that governs voting. And you can't just unregister somebody to vote. So just because a private citizen thinks that this person shouldn't be registered, we don't go, oh, well, thank you for that information. Let me go and just cancel their right to vote, right? Because that would be insane, first of all, if we should all be alarmed that someone would do that. That based on some random information from somebody who is not involved in the voting process tells you you should cancel someone's constitutional right to vote would be an absolute insane world to live in, and I certainly hope we never get there. And there is a process that we follow that is subscribed in law. And so if we have reason to believe that someone may not be registered to vote properly, meaning maybe they've moved out, we'll just do that, a very basic situation. Maybe they've moved out of your jurisdiction. Then we send them a cancellation. We do someone the favor, if you will, or at least the courtesy of informing them before we're going to cancel their constitutional right. We send them a card and, hey, looks like you don't live here anymore. Is that true? And then they have to respond to us. And if they don't respond to us, then we still don't just cancel their right to vote. It starts a timer. You go in and you click verify on their voter file, verify address, or whatever you're verifying them for. In this case, verify their residential address. And if they don't respond or vote in the next 5 years, then their voter registration gets canceled, and that's just in an effort to keep our voter rolls clean, right? That's still not an attempt to take away someone's right to vote. But you figure in that time period, you've gone through 2 federal elections, which is where people typically vote. Mm-hmm. If you don't vote any other time, people tend to show up in November of a presidential election year. And that's okay, because they can choose to vote whenever they want. And that allows us to give a time frame to it to say when it's more reasonable to say, I think they moved out of here. And that's really important for folks to realize. There is constant maintenance of our voter rolls at the state level and at the local level. Constant. We're not just, we also don't want to have voter rolls where people don't live there anymore. But there is a fine line between keeping a voter roll clean and interfering with someone's constitutional right. And there is never going to be a news article about us saying that we we just canceled someone's right to vote without reason and without following that process. It's never going to happen. It would be, again, we don't want to live in that world. So,
Right.
And that I think is the most common misinformation out there, that, voter rolls are full of people who aren't eligible to vote. No, there are people who are not eligible to vote yet, but we don't know who they are, so we follow that process. And I don't know if you want to add any more to that, but
I'll just, sometimes, so we get calls at times around elections to say, my aunt who has passed away received a ballot. They did, interesting. We often find out they never received a ballot. They received an application to vote by mail. And an application to vote by mail is very different, obviously, than a ballot, right? So you may have just moved into your house and you're still getting mail for the folks who lived there before. I still get mail for the folks who, lived in our house, and we, return to sender. Always encourage folks that if you get election mail, specifically if you get election mail that says official election mail, to return to the local clerk. It's not, it's...
and it's easy to do. Mm-hmm. You can just hand it back to your postal carrier. You can just write return to sender on it. I believe there was a song about this before this time period. That is a very real process that's in place, right? Yeah. And that's what we ask people to do. Follow the process that's in front of us. If you get mail that's not yours, well, why are you keeping it? Why? Why would you, right? You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to send it back. And if you follow the process, then we can follow the process and know that that person's moved, and we can put them on that countdown clock.
And ahead of, a very large, state, and federal primary, as well as a very large federal election in November where eyes are going to be on Michigan, there's going to be an inundation of communications to voters in Michigan, whether it be through commercials, through mail, through folks knocking on your door. I encourage voters to, look at your mail like you would an email. We are taught so many things about how to look out for spam email or phishing.
And I guess the point, though, is that some of that's not even malicious, but it's concerning for voters because they want to be on the lookout for scams. And so we'll get that call, like Meredith said. I have gotten 8 ballots in the mail, and I'm like, okay, hold on, because I am very familiar with our system, and I cannot even figure out a scenario where we would have been able to send you out 8 ballots, right? I mean, you can't. You'd have to have 8 different voting profiles, which I have never seen before. But it's not. I mean, I kind of laugh about that a little bit, but no. Okay, so you got all these applications. Who did they come from? And when you really dig down, it says at the bottom, the Center for Voting or whatever, that's a very common one that we see. Some of them aren't even as savvy. Some of them are just an application to receive a ballot or a reminder that you haven't voted your ballot, right? Because they're getting that information at the state level. They can see on a daily basis whose have been turned in because it's so public, right? Because the process is so public. Voters can find out when we've checked in their ballot. Well, so can anybody else. And so they're trying to actually encourage you to follow through and turn your ballot in. But people get really suspicious of it, and for good reason. So we have to talk them through that process. And it really isn't malicious. They're not trying to get you to ask for more than one ballot. That's really not it. Mm-mm. But it is confusing for voters, and so for that reason, I don't care for it because I don't like it when my voters are confused. It's difficult enough to run an election without any confusion, let alone a little confusion, because elections are big things. Again, we are always available if a voter has a question. Call your local clerk. They can tell you exactly what they mailed you.
Now, what do I need to vote? If I show up at a precinct, what kind of information or ID do I need to vote?
You need identification that it includes your first and last name and a picture. After Proposal 2, the acceptable identification cards, if you will, or acceptable identification has increased. You can now use Kalamazoo County identification card. You can use your concealed pistol license. You can use an ID that you received from an educational institution. As long as those are current, identification. If you have a Michigan driver's license, of course you can use that. A Michigan state ID, you can use that.
And those can be expired.
And those
the other ones have to be current, though.
Yes, yeah. And if you arrive at the polls and you do not have identification, let's say you ran out, at the beginning of the day, you saw an early vote location, you wanted to run in and vote, you can still vote if you don't have identification. You will have to be in the poll book, and you also have to sign sign an affidavit swearing that you do not have your ID on you at the time that you wish to vote. An election inspector will sign to say that they're witness to you signing, and then you go through the process and you are issued a regular ballot. As long as your name appears in the poll book, you are, you're good to go.
In the moment you want to vote, you are not in possession of your ID for whatever reason, and there are so many reasons why you might not be, that we still don't take away your constitutional right to vote because that happens. We put that onus on the voter. They're the ones who sign that affidavit saying they don't have it and that they are the person that they say they are. That's a felony when you do that. So I don't know how many people would be willing to rack up a bunch of felonies to vote as other people, because to be able to swing an election, you'd be committed to going to prison for so long that I just can't imagine it would be worth it. But even regardless of that, we don't just take your right to vote away.
I guess my question would be, because the times we live in, people are always looking for reasons to say elections aren't how they should be. Now, you just said, if I don't have ID, you go in the record book, and I have to sign saying this is who I am.
And we keep that affidavit for as long as those election materials are relevant. For as long as anybody could ever go back and question, the results of that election, we keep all this information. So it's on file.
Well, and it's on the back of your application to vote. So the voter behind you, the voter in front of you had to fill out an application to vote as well. If you do not have identification when you come into the polls and you sign your application to vote, it's on the back of that application to vote where you would have to sign and attest to who you are.
I think you both kind of touched on it. But what do you guys want, people that are listening, people that are watching, what do you want them to know most about our elections that are coming up?
That as much as people think they have eyes on the November presidential primary that happens, or the presidential election that happens every 4 years, you have hundreds and hundreds of people within this county who have their eyes on every single election. There aren't just a few people pulling the strings. In Oshtemo alone, I have 98 election inspectors that help me through that process. In every jurisdiction, you have the cities of Portage and Kalamazoo, hundreds of election workers, and then you have all of the people who are staffed working the elections. You have so many eyes on this, and that is a good thing. And it's not just during the big election that most people think about. We are ensuring integrity in every single election, regardless of how many questions are on the ballot.
And I would also say, accessibility to the ballot has grown tremendously with the passage of Proposal 2, as Dusty said earlier. Voters have the opportunity to vote by mail. They have the opportunity to go to their precinct and vote on Election Day. They now have the opportunity to vote one of 9 days at an early vote location located, in their neighborhood or down the street from their employer. Folks have access to the ballot. And I'd encourage everyone to make their voice heard in this upcoming primary on August 6th, as well as November 5th, and vote.
I guess my final question is, you said something about a song called Return to Sender. Is that the song we're going to do now?
Did you want me to sing that?
I sure did. That's the question.
All my dreams are coming true.
As long as you're the backup singer, because remember, I'm the lead singer.
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
I'm Kerria Randolph from Inside Kalamazoo, and I'd like to thank our guests today, Meredith Place and Dusty Farmer.
Thank you so much for having us. Again, I'm Dusty Farmer, clerk in Oshtemo Township.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Meredith Place, Kalamazoo County Clerk and Register of Deeds.
If you enjoyed our show, please like, follow, and subscribe through whatever medium you're watching this on or listening to this on. And if you're interested, we would really appreciate any donations at kzoodems.com. That's KZOODEMS.com. Thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Inside Kalamazoo is a production of the Kalamazoo County Democratic Party in association with MIC Media. Hosted by Kerria Randolph. Production engineering and editing by Mike Rader. Produced by Dakota Shapiro, Pam Jackson, and Mike Rader.